The train that shouldn't stop. In the mountains of Colorado, USA, there is an abandoned train station called Red Hollow Station. The station closed in 1987 after a strange accident on the tracks. Since then, no trains have stopped there. At least, none that are supposed to. Locals say that once every month, at 3:07 a.m., a train arrives at the station. The strange thing is, there are no passengers. And no conductor. Just empty cars. But people claim if someone boards the train, it will take them somewhere they were never meant to go. Jason Miller had heard the story from a coworker. "Don't ever go to Red Hollow Station at night," the man warned. Jason left. "Why?" The man leaned closer and whispered, "Because the train still stops." Jason loved urban legends. He had a small YouTube channel where he tested creepy locations and myths. And this sounded perfect for his next video. So one cold October night, Jason packed his camera and drove into the mountains. The road twisted through tall pine trees until he finally saw the old station. Red Hollow Station looked frozen in time. Broken lights, rusty rails, and a wooden platform slowly falling apart. Jason checked the time. 2:58 a.m. 9 minutes until the supposed train arrival. He set up his camera and began recording. "All right, guys," he whispered into the lens. "I'm standing at the abandoned Red Hollow Station. According to the legend, a train should arrive here at 3:07 a.m. The wind moved softly through the trees. Nothing else." Jason smiled. "Looks like another myth busted." Then, far in the distance, he heard it. A train horn. Jason froze. The tracks ahead were supposed to be abandoned, but the sound was getting louder. A deep metallic rumble echoed through the mountains. Lights appeared in the darkness. A train was coming. Jason's camera shook slightly as the massive black locomotive slowly rolled toward the station. But something was wrong. The windows were dark. The cars were silent. And no one was inside. The train stopped directly in front of Jason. The door of the first passenger car slowly opened. A cold gust of air blew out from inside the train. And then Jason heard a voice. From inside the empty car. Soft. Echoing. Calling his name. "Jason, get on." The empty train. Jason stared at the open train door. Cold air poured out from inside the passenger car. Thick and unnatural. Like air from a deep cave that had been sealed for decades. His camera was still recording. The small red light blinked steadily. He whispered into the microphone, trying to keep his voice steady. "Okay, so the train actually showed up. I don't know how. These tracks haven't been used in years." Behind him, the forest was completely silent. No wind. No insects. No animals. Just the low metallic hum of the train engine. Jason slowly stepped closer to the open door. Inside, the train car was dimly lit by flickering ceiling lights. Rows of empty seats stretched down a narrow aisle. Every seat was empty. Every window was dark. But the strangest thing was the silence. There was no sound from the engine. No movement from the wheels. The train looked like it was running, but it felt completely dead. Jason raised the camera toward the doorway. "Hello," he called out. His voice echoed strangely inside the train car. No answer. Then the voice came again. Soft. Almost whispering. From somewhere deeper inside the train. Jason, he froze. That wasn't possible. No one knew he was here tonight. His viewers didn't even know about this video yet. He slowly climbed the metal steps and stepped inside the train. The temperature dropped immediately. His breath became visible in the cold air. The moment both feet touched the floor, the door slammed shut behind him. Jason spun around. "Hey!" He grabbed the handle and tried to pull the door open. It wouldn't move. Locked. Suddenly, the train lurched forward. The floor vibrated beneath his feet. Outside the windows, the station began sliding away into darkness. Jason's heart pounded. This isn't funny. The train accelerated quickly, faster than any normal train should on these old tracks. Jason ran down the aisle looking for anyone. "Hello." His voice bounced off the empty walls. The lights flickered again. And for a brief moment, he thought he saw someone sitting at the far end of the car. A dark shape. But when the light stabilized, the seat was empty. Jason tried the next car door. Locked. The one after that. Locked too. The train suddenly plunged into darkness as it entered a tunnel. The lights inside the car dimmed to a faint yellow glow. Outside the windows there was nothing but solid black. Jason checked his phone. No signal. Of course. Mountains. He turned back toward the aisle. And that's when he noticed something strange. The seats were no longer empty. At least, not completely. In one seat near the middle of the car, something was sitting there. A shape. Barely visible. Jason slowly raised the camera. Is someone there? The shape didn't move. He stepped closer. The closer he got, the more the shape began to form. It looked like a person. But the details were wrong. The body looked thin and pale. The clothes looked outdated, like something from decades ago. Jason stopped a few feet away. Hey, are you okay? The figure slowly lifted its head. Jason felt his stomach drop. The face was gray. The eyes were hollow. And the skin looked soaked, like someone who had been trapped underwater for too long. The figure's mouth slowly opened. But instead of speaking, a loud train whistle exploded through the car. The lights went completely out. Jason stumbled backward. The train screeched violently as it slowed down. For a few terrifying seconds, everything was dark. Then the lights flickered back on. The seat was empty again. The figure was gone. Jason breathed heavily, trying to calm himself. This isn't real, he whispered. But the train was definitely real. And it was stopping again. The brakes screeched loudly as the train rolled to a halt. Jason carefully looked out the window. What he saw made his blood run cold. The train was no longer in the mountains. Outside the window was a massive train station. But it looked wrong. The building was old. Much older than Red Hollow Station. The signs looked faded and cracked. And the platform was filled with people. But they weren't moving. Hundreds of them stood perfectly still. Men, women, children, all facing the train. None of them blinking. None of them breathing. Jason slowly stepped toward the window. Their clothes looked like they came from different time periods. Some from the 1940s. Some from the 1970s. Some even older. Their faces were pale and lifeless. And every single one of them was staring directly at him. Then the loudspeaker crackled above the platform. A distorted voice echoed through the station. Next stop, Red Hollow. Jason's chest tightened. The train door opened with a loud hiss. One of the figures outside suddenly moved. It stepped forward slowly. Then another. Then another. They began walking toward the train. Their movements were slow and unnatural, like puppets learning how to walk again. Jason backed away from the door. No, no, no. The first figure stepped inside the train. Its eyes locked onto Jason. Its voice came out like a dry whisper. You shouldn't have boarded. More figures began entering the car behind it. Jason turned and ran down the aisle. The train suddenly lurched forward again. The door slammed shut. Outside the windows, the strange station disappeared into darkness. Jason collapsed into a seat, breathing hard. Behind him, the footsteps continued down the aisle. Slow. Dragging. Coming closer. And closer. Jason slowly turned his head. The passengers were standing in the aisle now. Dozens of them. Silent. Watching him. One of them stepped forward. Its hollow eyes stared into his. And then it spoke the words that made Jason realize something horrifying. You're not supposed to leave. The station that was never on any map. Jason pressed himself against the back of the train car, his heart hammering so hard he could hear it in his ears. The passengers stood in the aisle. Dozens of them. None blinking. None breathing. Just watching him. Their pale faces looked lifeless, like statues carved from gray stone. Their eyes were hollow and distant, yet somehow focused entirely on him. Jason slowly raised his camera. The red recording light was still blinking. Okay, he whispered to the camera, his voice shaking. Something is really wrong here. The figure closest to him tilted its head slightly. Its voice came out dry and broken. You don't belong here. Jason swallowed hard. Where's this train going? The passengers didn't answer. Instead, they slowly stepped aside, creating a narrow path down the aisle. Jason didn't move. But the message was clear. They wanted him to walk forward, toward the next train car. Jason's mind raced. Every instinct told him to stay where he was. But another thought crept in. Maybe the way out was forward. Slowly, he stepped into the aisle. The passengers remained completely still as he passed them. Up close, their faces were even more disturbing. Some looked ancient. Some looked like they had died young. One man's clothes looked like they were from the early 1900s. Another passenger wore a faded military uniform. Jason realized something chilling. These weren't random people. These were people from different decades, different eras, different lives. And yet they were all on this train, waiting. Jason reached the door to the next car. The metal handle felt freezing cold. He hesitated, then slowly pulled it open. The door creaked loudly. The next train car looked different. There were no seats, only long metal poles running along the ceiling. The floor was wet, not with water, but with something dark and sticky. Jason looked down. Footprints. Hundreds of them. Leading toward the far end of the car. The air inside smelled old, like rust and rain. Jason stepped inside. Behind him, the door slammed shut again. He spun around. The passengers from the previous car were gone. Vanished. Only silence remained. The train suddenly shook violently as it entered another tunnel. The lights flickered rapidly. Jason walked carefully down the car, following the footprints. They all led to a single door at the end. A heavy metal door. Unlike the others. Above it was a small cracked sign. It read, "Final stop." Jason felt a deep knot form in his stomach. The train began slowing down again. But this time the brakes didn't screech. Instead, the entire train seemed to glide smoothly to a stop. Jason looked out the window. Darkness. Nothing but endless darkness. No mountains. No station. No lights. Just black emptiness stretching in every direction. The loudspeaker crackled again. The distorted voice returned. But this time it sounded closer. Almost human. "Passengers, prepare to exit." Jason stepped away from the door. "No," he whispered. The metal door suddenly unlocked with a loud click. It slowly opened by itself. Cold air rushed inside. Jason looked through the doorway. What he saw made his legs weak. The train had stopped at a massive underground platform. But it wasn't a normal station. The ceiling stretched so high it disappeared into darkness. Broken staircases led upward to nowhere. Old train tracks crossed the ground in every direction. And hundreds of trains were parked there. Rusty. Silent. Abandoned. Each train looked different. Some looked modern. Others looked extremely old. But every single one had its doors open, like they were waiting. Jason stepped off the train. His shoes echoed loudly across the concrete floor. The moment he stepped onto the platform, the train behind him closed its doors. He turned around quickly. Wait! The train engine roared to life. Slowly, it began pulling away. Jason ran toward it. But the train moved faster and faster until it disappeared into the darkness of the tunnel. Leaving him alone, Jason stood in the middle of the enormous underground station. His breathing echoed across the empty space. Then he heard something else. Footsteps. Hundreds of them. He slowly turned around. The passengers from the train were now standing across the platform. Dozens of silent figures. Watching him, one of them stepped forward. The same pale man who had spoken before. "You arrived," the man said quietly. Jason shook his head. "I didn't mean to come here." The man looked almost sympathetic. "No one ever does." Jason glanced around the station. "Where's this place?" The man pointed upward toward the darkness above. "This is where lost trains arrive." Jason frowned. "What do you mean?" The man looked toward the hundreds of trains parked in the distance. Every train that disappears, every train that never reaches its destination, comes here. Jason's blood ran cold. "You mean the passengers?" The man nodded slowly. "They stay." Jason's heart pounded. "For how long?" The man looked at him with hollow eyes. Forever. Jason backed away slowly. No, there has to be a way out. The man said nothing. Instead, he pointed toward the far end of the station. Jason followed his finger. In the distance, one train was different from the others. Its lights were on, and its engine was running. Jason turned back to the man. That train. The man nodded again. It leaves once every 50 years. Jason stared at it. Where does it go? The man's voice became even quieter. Back. Jason didn't wait. He ran. His footsteps echoed loudly across the massive station as he sprinted toward the only train with lights. Behind him, the passengers remained still, watching, waiting. Jason reached the train and grabbed the metal ladder. He pulled himself inside. The door slammed shut behind him. The engine roared louder. The train began moving immediately. Jason collapsed into one of the seats, breathing heavily. Outside the windows, the underground station slowly disappeared into darkness. For a moment, everything was silent. Then the loudspeaker turned on again. But this time the voice sounded clear. Next stop, Red Hollow Station. Jason almost laughed in relief. He made it. He was going back. But as the train sped through the tunnel, something strange caught his attention. He looked at the seat across from him. Someone was sitting there. A young man, holding a camera. Jason's stomach dropped. The man looked exactly like him. Same jacket, same camera, same face. The other Jason slowly raised his head. His eyes were hollow. His voice came out as a whisper. You shouldn't have boarded. The lights went out, and the train kept moving. Into the darkness. The passenger, who never left. The train rushed through the darkness. Jason sat frozen in his seat, staring at the figure across from him. The other Jason. Same face. Same clothes. Same camera resting in his hands. For several seconds, neither of them moved. The train lights flickered weakly above them, casting long shadows across the empty car. Jason's voice came out shaky. Who are you? The other Jason slowly lifted his head. His eyes looked empty, like someone who had been staring into darkness for far too long. You already know, the figure whispered. Jason shook his head. No. That's impossible. The other Jason leaned forward slightly. When you boarded the train, you stepped into a place outside normal time. Jason's stomach tightened. What does that mean? The figure glanced at the windows, where the tunnel walls rushed past like black waves. It means not everyone who boards the train returns the same way. Jason felt a chill run through his entire body. You're saying, I'm not the first version of me? The other Jason slowly shook his head. No. The train suddenly jolted violently. The lights flickered again. Outside the windows, something changed. The tunnel was gone. Instead, the train was now moving through a strange gray landscape. There were no mountains, no sky, just endless fog stretching across empty ground. Jason leaned toward the window. What is this place? The other Jason answered quietly. The space between destinations. Jason turned back toward him. How long have you been here? The figure paused, then spoke in a tired voice. I stopped counting after the first 20 years. Jason's breath caught. 20 years. The other Jason nodded slowly. The train doesn't move through distance. It moves through time. Jason's mind raced. So, when the train said it only leaves every 50 years. The other Jason finished the sentence. It meant 50 years in the world outside. Jason looked down at his hands. His heart began pounding again. You mean if I get back? You might return to a world that has already moved on without you. Silence filled the train car. The engine roared as it continued racing through the gray fog. Jason suddenly stood up. There has to be a way out of this. The other Jason gave a small, sad smile. There is. Jason's eyes lit up. Where? The figure slowly pointed toward the front of the train. The conductor. Jason frowned. But there wasn't one. There is now, the other Jason replied. At that exact moment, a door at the front of the train creaked open. A slow set of footsteps echoed down the aisle. Heavy. Measured. Jason turned toward the sound. A tall figure stepped into the dim light. The conductor wore an old black uniform. His coat looked ancient, covered in faded gold buttons. But his face was hidden beneath a dark shadow from his hat. He stopped halfway down the aisle. Jason felt something deeply unsettling about him. The conductor's voice was calm.
Cold.
Ticket. Jason blinked.
What?
Passengers must present a ticket. Jason shook his head. I never got one. The conductor slowly tilted his head. That is unfortunate. The other Jason stood up suddenly. Wait. The conductor turned toward him. The hollow-eyed version of Jason held up the camera. This was my ticket. The conductor looked at it silently, then nodded. Correct. Jason frowned. I don't understand. The conductor began walking toward them again. Every passenger who boards the train must leave something behind. Jason's voice trembled. What kind of thing? The conductor stopped directly in front of him. Something important. Jason slowly looked down at the camera in his hands. His YouTube channel. His videos. The reason he came here in the first place. The conductor extended his hand. Your ticket. Jason hesitated. If I give you this, will I get off the train? The conductor didn't answer immediately. Finally, he spoke. You will return to where you boarded. Jason glanced toward the other version of himself. What about him? The hollow-eyed Jason smiled weakly. I already used mine. Jason's chest tightened. So you're stuck here? The other Jason nodded. Someone always has to stay behind. Jason slowly held the camera out, but just before handing it over, the train shook violently. The lights flickered rapidly. The conductor's head slowly turned toward the window. Outside, the gray fog began swirling violently. Something massive moved within it. Something following the train. Jason stepped back. What is that? The conductor's voice became darker. That is why the train keeps moving. The fog outside exploded as a giant shadow slammed against the side of the train. Metal screamed. The windows cracked. Jason stumbled backward. What is that thing? The conductor looked at him calmly. The reason passengers are needed. Jason's stomach dropped. What do you mean? The conductor looked directly into his eyes. The train requires souls to keep it running. The other Jason whispered quietly. It's feeding the thing outside. The massive creature struck the train again. The entire car tilted dangerously. Jason grabbed a seat to stay upright. What happens if it catches the train? The conductor answered coldly. Then everything ends. The shadow outside rose higher. Through the cracked window, Jason saw something terrifying. Dozens of enormous arms reaching through the fog, trying to grab the train. The conductor turned back toward Jason and extended his hand again. Your ticket. Jason realized the horrible truth. Someone had to stay on the train, to keep it moving, to keep the creature chasing it. Jason looked at the hollow-eyed version of himself. How long has that thing been chasing the train? The other Jason answered quietly. As long as the train has existed. Jason looked at the camera in his hands one last time, then slowly handed it to the conductor. The conductor took it and nodded. Your stop is approaching. The train lights suddenly went completely dark. Outside the windows, the fog vanished. Jason heard a familiar sound, whine through pine trees. The distant call of an owl. The train slowed, then stopped. When the lights came back on, Jason was standing alone on the platform of Red Hollow Station. The train doors slammed shut. The engine roared, and the train disappeared into the night. Jason stood there breathing heavily.
Alive. Free.
But far away, deep in the mountains, somewhere beyond time and space, another version of him was still sitting on that train, watching the fog, waiting for the next passenger.